Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of the Viking Chat, and I am delighted to be joined today by none other than Ms. Julie Ford of the Lettings Advice Service. Julie, darling, thank you for coming in. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Doing the in-person Shoreditch shizzle.
Absolutely.
And having fun with trains on the way down, I gather.
Oh, don't even get me started. The travel disruption seemed to have been my nemesis today.
Trains are awesome, I gather, and that's why I drive everywhere. Cool. So on that public service announcement, so Julie, we're going to kick around a few things today.
Yeah.
So you and I have known each other probably for a good decade. I would say maybe longer.
Probably longer, but bearing in mind we both started in this industry when we were 2, that would be about.
You know,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fine. That's why we're so young still.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we met, we danced around kind of working with or around similar people. Mm-hmm. But then you and I really got to know each other like properly a couple of years ago with the Zoopla Lettings Advisory Board.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do quite a lot on there. And then, so one thing that really struck me, because obviously, like I said, we knew each other early doors. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know what you'd kind of gone off and done, and you've leveraged your expertise, and we'll go into that in more detail. I mean, Lettings Advisory Service, don't think we need to take too many wild guesses on what that does. But the thing that, when we were looking at expanding the Zoopla board, mm-hmm. and we wanted to try and bring in people with different experiences, different mindsets, obviously all around lettings, obviously. But when you and I were catching up on all the things you'd done and what you were doing, the thing that really sparked my interest, because I still to this day haven't heard anyone else talking about this, is your approach and attitude to handling situations with tenants in arrears.
Yeah.
Cool. So, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me it became really predominant when COVID hit. Yeah. Because there was a moratorium on evictions. People were being furloughed, laid off, losing their jobs left, right and centre.
Scary times.
Rent arrears were building up quite considerably. And there wasn't really anything that landlords could do about it. They couldn't evict because the courts were shut. Yeah. So to me, there was a problem that needed solving. I'm a bit like the A-team. If you've got a problem and no one else can fix it, call me.
So are you Murdoch?
Oh, I don't know. I think sometimes I'm a bit Mr. T.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't like flying?
No.
Get on a plane, sucker.
I do like milk though.
That was a terrible Mr. T impersonation.
So I was like, there's a problem here and I need to solve it. And when I worked at the Citizens Advice, that was my kind of like I moved into the dark side. Worked for the Citizens Advice for 6 years as a housing and homeless law specialist. It opened up my knowledge base, I suppose. Because
before that, primarily an agent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it had been
property
purely
manager.
Agent-based. It had been property management. So it had been that one side of the coin. Moving into third sector, you were then on the other side looking out almost. And I didn't realise there were so many grants and trusts that tenants could tap into. No. So at the Citizens Advice, we didn't necessarily do so much of that, but I still took that knowledge away with me. And then, of course, when COVID hit and people were in rent arrears, I was like, haha.
Hold on a minute.
I have the solution. So I basically set up sort of overnight on my laptop the rent arrears support service. Yeah. RAS, and that kind of moved forward. I started working with landlords whose tenants were in arrears. We were finding grants and funding to pay off those arrears so that the landlord has the money in the back pocket where it should be, and the tenant doesn't have the debt and the threat of eviction. So it was solving two people's problems at once.
So in a nutshell, guys, what we're talking about here is not going the typical route of Section 8s. Well, because I'm not even referring to Section 21s anymore. Section 8s, rent arrears, court proceedings, evictions, bailiffs. The traditional methodology of pursuing serious rent arrears. Mm-hmm. But your thing was, let's see if there's another solution. Because let's face it, right? In most instances, and we know there are the rogue element, but they are exactly that, a tiny rogue element. In most instances, tenants don't want to be in rent arrears. It's not a situation of their desire. You know, they just want a roof over their head, and
a quiet life, basically.
And a quiet life, and to me that, you know, most don't want to stitch over their landlord.
100%.
You know, most just and don't want the stress and the pressure that comes with being pursued about that, the concerns over CCJs and court proceedings and everything else. So, yeah, I mean, the moment you told me about this, and you don't hear about this anywhere. Like you said, you didn't know about this until you went to work for CAB.
Yeah.
And still to this day, I mean, I know about it because of our conversations, but outside of our sphere, I've never heard anyone else talk about this. I've never once seen Citizens Advice reach out to our industry or the NRLA or, any way into the PRS and being like, hey guys, by the way, there is a different way to do this.
Interestingly, on the back of that, I actually reached out to Step Change, because Step Change wrote an article that basically was asking the government to create almost like a tenant arrears service, a tenant support service for arrears. And I was like, I'm doing this.
Yes.
It's me. Pick me. So I managed to get in touch with the CEO and I managed to have a conversation. And they were like, oh yeah, this is great. But it's individual landlords, so they weren't going to back it. And I'm like, but I'm bringing you a solution. You had the problem. I've already solved it.
And you've already ring-fenced the funding because you've already created the grant system that puts this funding there to be tapped into. You don't have to create any new funds. They're there waiting to be used.
Absolutely. And the thing is, when you look at the funding available at the moment for this financial year, there's £1.7 billion worth of funding available for tenants to tap into if they can't afford their rent.
I mean, that's insane.
1.7 billion.
Wow. So I mean, because the average rent, what's the average rent in the UK now? About 1,500 a month, or is it not quite that high? Maybe more like 1,250.
I think the last time I saw was 1,300 and.
So let's round it. Let's call it 15,000 a year.
Yeah.
Give or take. And then what did you say is available? About 1.7 billion.
1.7 billion at the moment.
So at 15,000 a year, I mean, 1,000 properties would be 15 million. So about 100,000 months of rent arrears sat in an account. Yeah. So, and look, I've always found this fascinating because I love it when people take a different approach to solving a problem. I think particularly in our industry, we're very, very good at doing what's always been done and then moaning about the fact that it isn't a very good process.
Yes.
Without actually going, well, hold on, why do we do that? And there's a couple of things we've done over the years with Base, which very much stemmed out of that, our property life skills service, where we teach our tenants basic things like, how to use a fuse board and how to bleed a radiator, balance a boiler, maintain your drains, identify condensation and mold. Yeah. Who knew that would come in handy with AWABs coming around? And the same year, so 2012 we rolled that out, and the same year we rolled out something we call basic appliances, which is on temporary loan appliances that we have. So fridge freezers, plug-in rads, hot plates and combi ovens. So we have a handful of each of those, and the first thing we do in a managed property where a tenant calls up and goes, my fridge is gone, is we just stick one in an Uber or in the back of one of our cars, depending what time of day it is in our diary, and we deliver that free of charge. We don't charge the landlord or the tenant, and we plonk it in there. And that was very simply a thing of us going, in those instances, well, yes, it's inconvenient for the tenant, but landlords, and again, their property managers, are not sat there with a stack of relevant appliances in the office just waiting for someone to fit them. If the appliance needs a repair, it's almost always going to need a part, and that's almost always going to need ordering. So what do you do in that time gap? And the landlord's done nothing wrong. You as a property manager can't make this stuff materialise quicker, but at the same time, you've got a tenant who's paying rent. If it's a house share, that's a whole lot of food that's going to go off if you can't do anything with a fridge for 5 days. And if the tenant's got to do takeouts or delivery for the next week whilst you get it sorted, where are those conversations around compensation, around incurred costs, around and everything else, the stress and aggravation that you get? And what we found was, those appliances, I don't think we spent more than £1,000 on all of the appliances. Because it doesn't need to be swanky stuff, right? No. Also with the fridge freezers, they don't need to be big, all singing or dancing, big enough that people can chuck stuff in. You've got that temporary solution that gives you those 2, 3, 5, 7 days to do a proper fix or replace, bosh, everyone's happy. But that all came about us going, well, landlords and property managers can't move faster.
No.
But if I was that tenant, I'd be pretty peeved that I've got nowhere to keep my food for the next week. And how do we solve that problem? And obviously, the typical industry thing is,
not my problem.
Not my problem. We're fixing it as quick as we can. And I've always felt in London, because of the rents and the fees that that agents typically charge in London, we've got the scope to be a bit more creative.
Yeah.
And we've got the scope to say, what else can we do to solve this problem? But no, I think it really struck me. I also like anything that takes a more kind of holistic and empathetic approach rather than this default position. I think we're seeing it a lot at the moment with talk around the Renters' Rights Act, about the changes that are coming in. And there's a lot of default language where people are talking about the broken PRS and all this sort of stuff because they're defaulting to the fact that every tenant is on some sort of swindle.
Yeah.
Every tenant's there to go, so now it's 3 months rent arrears and it will take me a year to get in front of a judge. And, I can contest the rent increase for free and that will put that off for another year. And, I can report them for AWAB's law for condensation and I can bounce every 3 months. And, and yet if you stop and think about it, Jesus Christ, no tenant wants to be doing any of that stuff, right? The average tenant wants a safe and reliable home to live in, that they pay what they think is relatively reasonable for it. And ultimately, unless something breaks, they're pretty much left alone.
Yeah.
And equally, landlord gets their rent paid on time and tenant does a reasonable job of looking after it and everyone's happy days, right? I mean,
absolutely. And that's pretty much the whole point of lettings. Everybody wants an easy life. Landlord just wants the rent paid so he can pay the mortgage and everything else. Tenant just wants to be left alone. They've got a roof over their head.
They just want a home.
Absolutely. But they need that security as well. And I think that's where the Renters' Rights Act has really fallen down, because I think it's actually removed the security for tenants hugely.
Yeah, it's...
Because I'm speaking to tenants who are like, I've got children in a school catchment area. I signed a 24-month contract on purpose.
Yeah.
Now that's going to go. What if the landlord wants to sell? I'm screwed.
So this was really interesting. This was something I flagged quite early doors with MHCLG, both at our Zoopla advisory meetings that they came to, but also Lettings Industry Council stuff that they attended as well. And yeah, I mean, look, we all know the Act is still open to change and interpretation. I think the important thing was, I think some people had too many expectations of the Act. We need more detail, we need more this, we need more fringe cases. No, there's too much being legislated for them to drill into that much detail. Yeah. And in reality as well, there's always an element of put it in the real world, see what happens, and we'll kind of figure that stuff out.
Yeah. Case law will just fill in the grey areas, won't it?
Yeah, case law will fill in some. There's some stuff, we talked about the rent tribunal, there is a concern, and I'm still cautious about this, because I think one of my questions over how this is implemented is we're moving into a very different era of tenant. And something that isn't getting talked about a lot in the world of AI, which is getting talked about a lot,
yes, is
the new AI-empowered tenant. Because if there's one thing you and I know, and a lot of agents in the game know, tenants, and a lot of landlords as well, but with the Renters' Rights Act coming in, tenants historically are very poorly informed on what their rights and responsibilities are within the lettings market. And that information is quite hard. If you don't know what you're looking for, we all know that information is quite hard to find in a digestible, practical, plain English context where a tenant with no understanding of the property industry or property law can actually read it, digest it and go, my landlord should have done X, Y, Z, or my agent, or I should have done X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And I think, and look, a perfect example of that is we've got the deposit laws, the tenancy deposit laws, which are now 18 years old. And we still have tenants who are utterly clueless as to their rights and responsibilities under that, and primarily their rights.
Yeah.
That has always kind of benefited your, let's call them lackadaisical landlords and agents, those who are kind of middle roading it, and below, because they have always been able to kind of muddle on, because there weren't there weren't particularly clear frameworks on what happens in what instance and what a landlord or agent should have done, but also how a tenant enacts that, what their rights are and how they can enforce it. Because there was always that groundwork. Again, we talk about homes and tenants, and again, we come back to this point of tenants. They don't want to have battles, they're letting agents and landlords. They don't want to come home and have to trawl through their contract and research clauses, and they just want to be left at home. But the difference now is this world of AI. This world of AI that we're coming into, and particularly this next phase that we will see gain more and more traction next year, this agentic AI, where AI will start to be proactive for you. You won't need to ask it stuff. We're already starting to see it, right? But you will see this more and more. And so what I think we will start to see is we will start to see tenants, and let's not forget, right, the data tells us tenants don't want to have a phone call. They don't want to, they sure as hell don't want to come in person to your office.
No.
They don't like face-to-face. They find it too personal, too confrontational. For the same reason, they don't really want to get on a phone. They don't want to be put on the spot with a question or a decision. They want time to think about things. So most tenants, as we know, prefer WhatsApp, text, or email. The challenge with that now is you've got, at the moment, we've still got a tenant's default reaction to something. In 6, 12, 18 months' time, I think we will see a growing number, and again, let's remember, tenants are typically a younger demographic. Younger people are typically faster to adopt technology. Where ultimately, if no reaction by the tenant, you will have an email come in saying, oh, your landlord wishes to put your rent up in line with the contract and the act, and market data shows X, Y, Z, and here's the rent that we're proposing. And what I wonder is, right now, the rent tribunal thing, when this first came up in the initial Renters Reform Act with the Tories a couple of years ago, my response, before we were on this wave of AI, my response to agents, to fellow agents at the time was, we don't need to worry about this. Like, I've been a letting agent for 23 years. I've never had a tenant in any of the companies I've worked for even mention a rent tribunal. Even in my immediate circle of friends, I can never remember a fellow agent being like, oh God, we've got another rent increase going to tribunal. They do happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I looked at the data for last year, for 2024, for the tribunal and how many rent appeals went through, and it was 900.
Yeah, tiny.
Now you think how many tenants there are.
Yeah, what is it? 4.6
4.6
million households, isn't it?
Yeah,
so it's more tenants.
So 900 rent appeals went to tribunal, and on average they took 8 months to complete.
Yeah.
So
now, like I said, when this was first floated in the original Renters Reform Act 2 years ago, pre-AI, just as AI was starting to, but we had no idea about how quickly it was going to go and what that looked like. I've got to say, I kind of poo-pooed people's caution over this, because it was like, guys, seriously, what tenant is doing this? What I wonder is 12 months from now, with the current framework, which, as we know, is appalling in that clause, because it's just removed any friction for the tenant at all.
Absolutely.
No cost to do it, no backdated increase, no reward for a landlord offering below market either, because that was always that was my nice thing with a couple of the tribunals, where the tribunal actually awarded the landlord more than they'd asked, which I totally agree with. You should be rewarded when you're trying to be fairer to your tenant and then get taken to task. But I wonder, like I said, 12, 18 months from now, a lot of tenants don't do it because A, they're not that inclined, and B, they're totally unaware of the fact they even have that access to them. But when your ChatGPTs, your Geminis, your whatever are going, oh, here's a rent increase proposal from your letting agent, I've drafted a response, what do you think?
Yeah.
And in that response, it's going, well, as you know, following the Renters' Rights Act and the Rent Reform Bill, we are now entitled, and as such, we will be enforcing our right to escalate that because there's no cost, there's no implication, they're not doing anything wrong, they're just enforcing their rights. I wonder also how many tenants will even read the response that AI has drafted.
Probably not.
I think they will give it a cursory glance over and go, send it, see what happens.
Yeah.
And so that's my only thing with a lot of the reframing that's happened as the Renters' Rights Act is agents have always got away with making more than a reasonable amount of mistakes because tenants are largely unaware of what that framework is. With tenants being so well informed, and like I said, with this supercomputer sat behind it going, well, now AWAB's law's in, this was first reported to you, because also let's not forget AI, we're already plugging this in both of our businesses. We can plug this into Google, we can plug this into Outlook, it can have access to every email we send, every document we save, every contract we issue, we can give it access to the whole lot. So it can go, well, as per AWAB's law, this was reported on this. And yes, whilst you did the initial investigation within the required 7 days, the next step was that you required a contractor to be appointed within 7 days, and that has not been fulfilled. And as such, we are now exercising our right. And that's my only question, is that AI is making this stuff so simple to do now. And look, we're not the only industry worrying about this.
No, for
right?
sure.
This will be every single industry out there. But when you're dealing with something as personal and all-encompassing as someone's home, and you are literally taking away the vast majority, and again, you and I touched on it before this, doesn't mean it's right.
No.
And this is where I think agents are going to have to up their game 10 times more than they are now. Not just to understand all these changes are coming in, but to know them well enough that when you get that AI drafted email that's wrong, to go, not sure if you looked this up online, but it's not 100% accurate. And this is where this is actually what needed to happen, or what your rights are, or what the process is.
But I think that's a wider problem across the industry anyway. I mean, when I was a property manager, and you know as well as I do that I am a geek, so when it came to doing my job, I knew that tenancy agreement backwards. I could quote you the clauses.
We're all geeks.
I could quote you the clauses. So if I've got a tenant on the end of the phone giving me some jip, I'm like, I think you'll find it's clause 2.5.4, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know if agents know their contracts anymore. I mean, I speak to agents and property managers and I'm like, what does it say in your contract? Well, I don't know. But it's your contract. Yeah. Why don't you know what it says?
Now look, part of that is you've got, and look, at base, we've done this around the Renters' Rights Act for now. We might change it, but we've just signed up with Goodlord. We're going to start using their contracts. Now, for the last 20 odd years, we've prided ourselves on having our own drafted tenancy agreements that we know inside out. Now, but I think that's a common thing. We're seeing more and more, agents adopt solutions, whether it's a Goodlord contract or a Property Mark 1, or, there's several lettings partnerships and providers out there that offer documentation that you can secure. No, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think most agents do know the
I think there's also a lack of review as well, because I'm reading through ASTs that have got such antiquated clauses in them, including stuff that would now breach Tenant Fees Act, for example.
Yeah.
Because it's just never been removed.
No.
We know it's void, we know
Because
it's
they just
unenforceable.
go, oh, but we won't enforce it.
Exactly. So they know it's void, they know it's
Yeah.
unenforceable, but they don't take it out.
Yeah.
And there is a problem, because if it's implied in the contract, even though we know it's not enforceable, it's still there. It's still technically a threat.
Yeah.
And tenants know that. If they're going forward with something else, so let's say it's a deposit claim or something like that, their solicitor's going to go through that with a fine-tooth comb and pick out all the clauses that are unenforceable. And, just it's another branch to beat them with, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. If they're minor things, you'd probably be all right. But if they're quite egregious, you could get the whole thing thrown out over it, or the contract
absolutely.
invalidated. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, look, Tenant Rights Act, Renters' Rights Act, rather.
I think you were right the first time.
I know.
Freudian slip.
Whoops. So, Renters' Rights Act. So, we've now got it, for all the naysayers who bemused me that anyone could think this wasn't going to happen after 3 or 4 years of cogitations through 2 different governments. So look, we're here now. We're waiting for the implementation schedule. I mean, I think, what I'm definitely seeing online is more and more people wanting to know more detail now.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that is one of my big disappointments at the moment, is given how long this has taken to get to this point, that government don't seem to have given much thought to what that implementation looks like. And bearing in mind, as we know, right, the last few rounds, the Act hasn't really changed much. It was very, very clear with the array of suggestions that were getting proposed and the rate at which they were getting swatted away, the government had very much made a decision of do you know what, we're pretty much there.
Yeah.
It's disappointing that they didn't take the last few months of that stance to go, cool, we don't have to know it all, but let's give people a framework. I mean, I think you got tagged in a post yesterday, or I don't know if you did, but I did, and Sophie Lang being asked about a person with their son who's done a student let, rent paid, I think, quarterly in advance or 6 monthly in advance per room on a locked fixed term contract. And, understandably, there's how do these rent payments go ahead? What happens to these rent payments going forward? What happens to the contract? What are the terms? When does this happen? Blah, blah, blah. And it was, I think the interesting thing that came out of all the comments on it is no one knows. You want answers that no one can give you yet. But all we can say is, until you get more answers, you just follow the terms of the signed contract. And ultimately, they're not, in her case, they're not going to become more egregious than they are, because she's obviously looking at it from a tenant's perspective. So it's at worst, the rent schedule will stay at what you've agreed to, but it might switch to monthly payments. Same financial commitment ultimately. And you can still, my understanding is that as a tenant, you could still choose to pay the rent in advance. You just can't be required to. Yeah, and there's also, we're still waiting for clarity over whether that's just for the first month, or, there's still some vagueness around the rent in advance protections. And again, contract, they've locked into a fixed 12-month contract, and it's the likelihood is you won't be held to that, because
we can't be.
It's going to become a periodic. Your 3 months will be from when you occupied the property, whenever that was. And by the time the Act comes in, you'll be well out of that. So you'll be into your 2-month notice period window.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the frustrating thing now. So we were chatting before. You are dashing here, there, and everywhere.
Yes.
On the countryside, primarily talking to agents.
Yes.
About all things renters' rights.
Yeah, so like I was saying to you earlier, I don't think I'm actually at home at any point in November. I'm literally hotel hopping from one end of the country to the other, working with agents, in-house training. I've been surprised, and I would say pleasantly surprised, how many agents want in-house training rather than over Zoom or something like that. I thought more would have opted for that. But I think managers and directors are now realising that in-house you've got more attention. Whereas if you're on Zoom,
you can't really ignore someone when you're sat in a room, right? You can't kind of phase out and start daydreaming about X, Y, Z.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they're realising that the in-house training gets more attention. And it's been really interesting to see the level and degree of existing knowledge. So there are some agents where I'm walking in there and they literally just know the name of the act and that's it.
Yeah.
There are some that have tried their best to educate themselves and there's just some tweaking that I need to do. But the most important thing that I think a lot of agents are not really getting their head around is they are going to have to fundamentally change their business model.
Yeah, revenue.
And I think this is something people haven't quite understood because there is so much changing, like we've just said, tenancies going periodic and things like that. The standard, let only, rent collection and fully managed isn't going to be the way forward in the new world. Fully managed, yes, absolutely.
Because fully managed won't fundamentally change much. And I'm not sure that rent collect will, but a lot of the industry, 2/3 of the PRS is let only. Mm-hmm. That's the stark contrast, right? Only about 36% of PRS homes are managed. Whereas, the other 2/3 are either completely self-let or managed by landlords or are let only by agents. And I think I'm right in saying that for agents it's pretty much kind of 50-50. The market that uses agents, about half. Yeah. And so for those big lump sum fees, as an industry, lettings has typically operated on that. Cool, we finalised a let, boom, there's our invoice for the vast majority of the revenue we're going to make on this deal. Now, the question is, if you can no longer guarantee a landlord more than 3 months occupancy, are your landlords going to be happy paying a year's fee when they get no security of tenancy after 3 months? Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe. Are you wrapping that, is there some undertaking with that? So, we charge you a year's fee, but we will re-let it however many times we need to in that year, or we will do one free re-let as part of that fee structure, that fee basis, because we know most of the compliance will carry over in that 12 months. Yeah. So you should be pretty good anyway. So then it's the facilitation. One interesting thing, I think change of tenants is going to go. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this in the office, and I don't think there is any agent or landlord in the land that will bemoan a change of tenant process going. Because I think, as we all know, and what the government totally failed to grasp with the tenant fee ban, is that rather than that being easier than a let, it is almost always harder and more work. I'll also say we've had two, very unusually for us, there are only disputes this year, we've had 2 disputes go to TDS relating to liabilities where we've facilitated a change of tenant. Because it's a change of tenant, TDS have sided on one case almost entirely, and in the other case entirely with the tenants. And, we've contested this, we've done an audit. We genuinely don't know what we could have done to document that differently or better. Because the fundamental kind of pushback we got was, oh yes, you did another report at the changeover, but there's people living there and there's personal effects. So we don't see the property at a move-in standard. We don't know what's the tenant's effects, what's the landlord's, because I think particularly with one of the disputes, they'd left a ton of stuff that they'd just abandoned. And then the landlord had to pick up a 450 quid clearance bill, But I've actually asked TDS if they can give more official guidance on a change of tenant, because I want to know what we could have done differently to protect our landlord. Because in both of those situations, we feel that the landlord has absolutely lost out on fair and reasonable proposals.
But to me, that sounds less like what you could have done more and more to do with TDS's processes. Just don't incorporate a change of tenancy in that way.
Oh, for sure. And look, we contested it, and full credit to TDS. They did do a full audit of both cases. They did a deep dive. They came back to us with their rationale, their findings. I don't agree with much of it, but full credit to them, we did get that. And I think that's where, obviously we've got base, but I'm obviously with depository, we're a partner with TDS. So, I do think that helped. And for depository, I also wanted to have a better understanding of that process. But I think that coupled with, like I said, as we all know, a change of tenant, our team, every time we get a request for a change of tenant, our team shudders because they know it is considerably more work than doing a new let.
Absolutely.
And stress and everything else. And so, these couple of recent findings combined with the structuring of the new tenancies under the Renters' Rights Act, we've pretty much said as a company, we won't be doing change of tenant anymore.
Well, there won't be the opportunity, will there?
Well, you're not locked into a contract,
Exactly.
right? So there's no longer this thing of a landlord and their agent having to be reasonable.
Exactly.
Because you're not tied into an unreasonable contract term.
Exactly. So tenant can give 2 months' notice at any point. Obviously, as
After
long
the
as
first
it's
month, but
in
in
line
theory,
with
we
rent
can
due,
give 3. Yeah.
But ultimately, that ends the tenancy for everybody because it's one out, all out. So there isn't going to be an opportunity to just early termination and replace.
Yeah.
Because that's now off the table completely because there's nothing to early terminate.
Yeah.
What do those other remaining tenants do?
And for us, we would rather facilitate a fresh let, potentially resetting the rent, which will typically mean, in most cases, that rent might creep up or make a substantial leap, who knows. You get to reset all of that, reset the period, everything. And like I said, at the moment, we're not legally allowed to charge more than 50 quid for that process. And it's more stressful, whereas, we won't charge a 50 quid change of tenant fee to the tenant, whoopee-doo. But what we will do is we will have our really nice, neat end of tenancy, new tenancy process that is much less work. And yes, we've probably already charged that client. I mean, we work on a different fee structure. We pivoted most of our landlords to a monthly fee quite a few years ago. And actually we did that, no savant action going on there. It wasn't some genius moment of I know where the market's going. We did it largely because fluxes of income. Like most agents, we have that busy summer period.
Peaks and troughs.
We would sign 65-70% of our tenancy agreements between kind of middle of July and beginning of October. So we would produce 65-70% of our annual income in a 2-month window. And you've then got all the fun of budgeting for the rest of the year. Quarterly tax returns and stuff came in, and it just, for all of that, it was just like, well, hold on, our overheads don't change each month. So really we want to stabilise our revenue. That was our thinking of why we brought it in, and lo and behold, it's put us, hopefully, in that respect, the transition for us for the Renters' Rights Act is really easy because it's more of the same. We talked about, do we need to have a minimum fee in there? Do we need to have a caveat in there? Do we need to protect ourselves from too many transitions, too many turnovers? And I think where we've landed on that, and again, I come back to the fact that we are fortunate to work in the London market with high rents and high fees. So, but I think, our mindset is that, our average tenant stays for about 4 years. I don't dramatically think that's going to change. I don't think we're going to see that get much longer. I do think we will see it get slightly earlier. Just because I think in renting, 4 years is quite a long time to stay. When you factor in all the reasons why you might move, falling in and out of love, or whether that's a flatmate or a partner, work, life, you know, all those mitigating circumstances that are fundamentally outside of your control. But I think, you know, most people come to a point where, like, you know, oh, it's time to make that next move, or they just want a change of scene. So I don't think 4 years is going to expand, but I equally don't think we're going to see tenants bouncing around, because moving's stressful.
Absolutely.
Moving's expensive.
Absolutely.
Plus,
you've got to go through the whole referencing process. Whereas if you were just kind of needed a short let, something like Airbnb is such a smoother process to go through for a short period of time, rather than having to go through the whole lettings rigmarole just for a short let that might be a couple of £100 cheaper or something.
Now, interesting you bring up short lets. I am intrigued whether we will see what I class as kind of the mid-term market, the 3-4 month company lets, which at the moment are stuck in Airbnb, service departments, hotels. I now wonder, will we see part of that market creep into the PRS market? Because, as we know, you only have to look online, particularly if you go on one of the portals and you've got someone like, for example, Foxtons, where they will often list a property for long and short-term rent, and you can see cold hard what that difference in rent is. And it is usually at least an uplift of 50% on the long-term rate. Now, like you said, yes, you'll have to go through the referencing, but you'll no longer have to make that long-term commitment. You can obviously say, yeah, of course, I plan on being here for like years. I don't ever want to move again. Safe in the knowledge that you've just signed a 3-month contract, that you're coming over here to do a 3-month consultancy, you're going to smash it out, and oh my God, I can rent a long-term home for like half the price of Airbnb or a third of the price of a hotel. Now, my only concern is, will we see that creep? And with PRS already under pressure from lack of social housing and everything else, is that going to be another kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Another kind of almost parasite. I don't want to necessarily give it such negative connotations, but is this another thing that's going to eke away at the supply of PRS homes for unintended consequences?
Possibly, but at the same time, from a landlord's perspective, that may not be such a bad thing. Because if it's not someone's main and principal home, then it takes them outside the act anyway.
But how will you know that? And that's my only problem, is that, like, how will you establish that? Well, this is the thing, right? Because you have to do proof of address, which could be Geneva or wherever. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's where I live now. I'm moving over here. Like, you know, you don't see. Now, again, you have to go through referencing. So if they have to provide a fixed term contract to 3 months, then you could argue, well, hold on a minute.
What happens at month 4?
But then you get into the grey area of, are you discriminating? Because that person could go, oh, well, it's a 3-month contract initially.
Yeah.
Which is very common. Again, that could go on. They're not obliged to make a commitment of more than 3 months. You know, so
I suppose the way around that is probably for landlords to rent properties that are unfurnished, because nobody's going to want to furnish for 3 months.
So this was the conversation we had in the office, and I think that's going to be interesting to see. I mean, we've definitely, over the last kind of 10 years or so, I think we've seen properties definitely become less furnished. I mean, we push for it with our landlords. We're like, look, focus on the big ticket items. The beds, the sofas, the dining table and chairs, the expensive stuff. And actually, why not spend a little bit more? Get something a bit nicer, a bit more design-led. Yeah. And then leave all the accoutrement to your tenant. Because also, my thing, I've rented now for too long. 27 years I've rented in London for. And in the home we're in now, everything is ours. Artwork, shelves, sofas, coffee tables, rugs, you name it. I think there's a chest of drawers that belongs to the landlord, and I think that's it. And for us, that's how you make it a home, right? And in Europe, this is very common. Europe is is more akin to our commercial let market. Yeah. And coming back to the point you made earlier about periodic tenancies and removal of Section 21 not necessarily being the big win for tenants that it is. I mean, without even touching on this mysterious landlord that evicts tenants for no reason.
I know, wakes up on a Monday morning and goes, do you know what?
You know,
what a great idea I had.
I still want any of these organisations to introduce me to these mysterious landlords who just kick a tenant out on a whim. And
because that makes
nothing
such
else.
good business sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, because that's what happens. So I've just sidetracked myself there. Where we go? Oh yeah. No balls. I've totally lost my train of thought there.
The unfurnished and the European market.
Yes, that's right. Sorry. So you were talking about security of contracts. In Europe, it's more like our commercial markets where you will take a longer let, you get longer security, but actually the undertaking by the landlord is a lot less.
Yes.
Like, we guarantee the building won't fall down on your head, and there will be water and some sort of utility supplied to it.
Yeah.
You know, and typically there is a functioning toilet and there is a functioning sink. That's pretty much it, much like you get in a commercial space.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, it's up to you as a tenant. You can go in, fit your own kitchens, bathrooms, wall flooring, you know, floor coverings, paint it, furnish it, live in it like we would a leasehold owned property here. And then at the end you hand it, you know, you strip it all out and you hand it back as a shell. There's a lot to argue for that. But the reason I bring that up is when we were talking to MHCLG with all the consultations, I said to them, well, look, why don't you introduce something like the Landlord and Tenant Act in commercial property?
Yeah.
Because in commercial property, they basically brought this law in to protect commercial tenants who would come into, particularly like less deprived areas, and would kind of re-energize areas with nice restaurants, coffees, shops. That would uplift the area. Everything, including commercial rents, would go. Yeah. And then the landlord would turn around and go, fantastic, I can now charge 3 times the rent I was giving you. I want triple the rent or you can bugger off. And then that tenant would leave and they'd bring in some blue chip company. And so they introduced the Landlord and Tenant Act, which basically prevented landlords from doing that. However, as a tenant, you can choose to forfeit your rights and protections under the Landlord and Tenant Act. You can sign, which is what we've done with the deed on our offices here in Shoreditch. We are now on our 4th or 5th lease. I can't remember. We had to do 5-year leases. So we're now on our fifth lease here. And actually our latest one is the first time we haven't had to sign an exemption on that. But the first few ones, because they were shorter and because Shoreditch was so in the ascendancy when we moved into the area. But that was our choice. Yeah. You know, if we didn't sign it, we didn't get the property. But equally, that was our choice. There were other options. Yeah. But we chose to forego our protection under that because we wanted this property and we knew we were protected for the term we were signing for. Yeah. And so my argument with MHCLG was, can't we trust that residential tenants can do the same? And look, I get it. There are concerns that an unscrupulous agent or landlord will pressure a tenant into signing a Landlord or Tenant Act document. There's always going to be that side of things. But I don't know if that is any different to the fact that entity is going to be applying pressure on that tenant in some shape or form, regardless of what laws and protections are in place. But, you know, I think it's unfortunate, and hopefully maybe this is something that will come down the line as government learns what does and doesn't work in this. But the fact is there are tenants out there, like you've said, largely tied to schools, I'd say is definitely kind of the number one thing. Being able to say, look, my kids just started their 5 years or 3 years, or whatever it is, at X school. I want that commitment and I'll make that commitment. Yeah. You know, I think it's foolish to think that tenants can't secure that if they wanted to. I mean, look, there are questions about that. You could potentially look to move the tenancy out into a company let agreement. It becomes more complicated and more expensive. But you could argue that in the case that we're talking about, that would be justified.
Yeah.
As long as you, I think as an agent or landlord, as long as you documented that interaction.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the fact that you were only offering that alternative, not to force them out of the Renters' Rights Act and somehow forego their protections, but for them to realise the security that they want. There are complications of that, as we know. You would have to form a company if you don't already have one, although that's pretty easy to do these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how these workarounds work. That's the other thing, right? There's a lot of scaremongering. But we're kind of getting towards the end. And one thing I realised, that what we covered right at the top of the subject, we didn't really see that through to the end. So we talked about your discovery working with Citizens Advice Bureau, this immense, what was it, 1.7? 1.7 billion pounds of funds that are there to assist tenants facing hardship, rent arrears, whatever. And again, your approach to resolve the issue rather than terminate the tenancy and evict tenants and everything else. And I think that's a fascinating approach to have taken in the market up until this point. But I think, and you and I touched on this before we jumped in front of the cameras, is with the Renters' Rights Act coming through, the reality is that problem's only going to get bigger, right?
Correct.
So
100%.
Government have made the insane, and of all the proposals in the Renters' Rights Act, the rent arrears one is the one that mystifies me entirely, because I do not understand how changing 2 months and 2 weeks, 2 months arrears and 2 weeks notice, to 3 months arrears and 4 weeks notice aids anyone. Because if a tenant can't pay their rent, if they need to be evicted or rehoused, why have you just added 6 to 7 weeks of rent arrears to the start of that process?
Yeah.
We know the courts are going to continue. The court situation, whether you're talking about property matters or anything, we know the courts are underfunded. We know that's not going to change anytime soon. So that's going to get worse. We've touched on the fact that AI is probably going to see more things progress to litigious circumstances more often. So we're going to see a greater backlog in the courts. And so I think not only does the approach you take, not only do I love that slightly more holistic thing of, let's try and find a solution here rather than scorch the earth, because obviously if a tenant is arrears, then it's just horrendous and they must be removed, and it's a horrible situation that can't be fixed.
Yeah, it really isn't. And I think with all of the cases that I've dealt with, there has probably been a handful of tenants that were just won't pays rather than can't pays. It was literally a handful, but they had other agendas for not paying.
Yeah.
They wanted that council house or whatever. So there was another agenda. But a lot of the time when they get into rent arrears, it's not their only debt. There'll be other debts that they're in a pickle
because
with.
they're juggling, right?
They're robbing people.
A lot of us have faced hardships. You juggle, you spread you go without paying your credit card bill for a couple of months, and then you have to not pay the rent so that they don't repossess your car.
But also, I think tenants, anybody that's in debt will pay the person that shouts the loudest. So if that happens to be a credit card who actually isn't priority debt and could personally just be put in a box for a while and just it's about understanding the difference between priority debts and non-priority debts. And I'm not saying that agents and landlords need to turn into debt advisors. I'm not. But if we have a basic understanding of the whole debt process, it's much easier to signpost tenants into the right help.
Well, I think it's understanding, right? And it's understanding why those circumstances have come to bear in the first place. Because like you said, there are those exceptions. There are the problems where they are doing it out of spite, out of playing the game, whatever it is. I'm glad to say in our nearly 21 years, we've had two. We've had two spiteful tenants. Not a lot you can do about them.
No, there isn't. And an eviction really is the only solution there because there's no working with them. But other tenants who are genuinely can't pay, they're easy to work with as long as they want to engage.
Yeah.
You know, and it's about having that communication. And I know what you said earlier about tenants don't like to have that face-to-face, that phone call. But actually in these situations, those are the best things to have.
I think where it's legitimate.
Yeah.
I think where it's legitimate. I mean, I talked about that more in an overarching kind of day-to-day interaction basis, you know. But I think in a crisis like being unable to pay your rent, I think whilst it might be scary to the tenant, I think as long as that meeting or phone call comes from a point of how do we fix this?
Absolutely, and I think that's something that needs to change as a mindset in the industry. And I think picking up the phone as a property manager and having to have that conversation with a tenant is just as scary as it is for the tenant to receive it.
Yeah.
Because we don't like confrontation and we don't know how that's going to be received.
And we know what the default attitude is to most agents, right or wrong.
Absolutely.
We don't get welcome through the threshold. It's not a, oh, fantastic, you're calling me again. I love you, my favourite person.
No, absolutely. And I think agents need to change the mindset that their job would be so much easier if the tenants didn't exist. There seems to still be an underlying
Because you know, any supply and demand market works really well when there's no one demanding what you're supplying.
Exactly. But there is still some antiquated mindset that, you know, the tenants are the problem.
I would go as far as saying I think that's the default mindset.
Okay, I was trying to be kind.
I think you are being kind, but I think consciously or not, I'm not saying that in every business up and down the country it is full on toxic.
No.
I think somewhere it is a casual toxicity. It is those casual throwaway comments of, oh, tenants.
Yeah.
You know, it's that default attitude. And like I said, a lot of the rhetoric from agents over the last 3 years around the Renters Reform, Renters' Rights Bill into Act has come from this default, oh my God, tenants are going to run riot.
Yeah.
You know. And look, even if they wanted to, you know, we're talking about rent arrears. Get a rent warranty. You know, not every tenant's going to qualify for them, but the vast majority will. The vast majority will, because most of them, actually, it's got nothing to do with the reference criteria, it's to do with risk. And the insurers pretty much know what that risk is, regardless of whether they pass or fail referencing. So, you know, for between 250 and 500 quid on pretty much any rent level, you can now indemnify a year's income, your cost to repossess the property. And some of them are now going further. I mean, the Good Lord have increased theirs. There is no excess on that. Yeah. It's payable from the time they sign the contract because of the restructuring of when fees need to be paid. And now it has to be paid after you sign the contract. And as we know, the signing of the contract, you know, officially a tenant could sign and demand keys, and you're legally obliged to provide those keys with them even without that first receipt of funds. Yeah. So Good Lord have thought ahead, seen that problem and gone, going to be a problem. You know, that's the reality of the matter.
Absolutely.
But we'll guarantee you anyway. Yeah. And so that's there. And I think, you know, I saw Harry Truman of Andrews, you know, she did a post about this the other day going, could people stop panicking? Because you keep on seeing these things like, oh my God, that's it. The PRS is dead. You know, tenants can now just move in, never pay their moving in monies. It's going to take them a year to move in, and what are landlords going to do? They're ruined. And it was like, yeah, but cool, but for 350 quid, they're not ruined.
Exactly.
And 97% of tenants aren't going to do that.
No. But then it comes back down to referencing, doesn't it? It comes back down to making sure you're doing robust referencing rather than just sort of a quick, that'll do, it'll pass. I think that's going to help because people don't do the previous landlord. They do the immediate landlord, but they don't do the previous landlord.
And you're never going to get, as we know, you know, landlords shouldn't lie, property managers shouldn't lie. But as we know, the problem with referencing is if you have anything from a difficult to a full-on nightmare tenant.
You're going to say they're an angel.
Of course, because if you tell everyone that they're an absolute nightmare and you categorically shouldn't rent with them, guess what happens? They stay in your property because they can't move anywhere. You know, it reminds me we years ago, I had an interesting interaction with, I think it was Stella Creasy, because we had to evict tenants, Section 21. They basically wanted a property they couldn't afford, refused to accept, like, we're just angry at the marketplace because they'd been in the home, we rented them for quite a few years, and it was like, guys, rents change. So they refused to move, refused to pay market rates. We ended up having to serve them a Section 21. And they then refused to pay their rent once we'd served that. But obviously still kept looking. And then we had an interesting interaction with Miss Creasy because we got a reference request. Now, they were legitimately in rent arrears. So we did say, look, up until the point where we actually had to serve papers, they were perfectly fine tenants, but we had to disclose the fact that they were in rent arrears now. They got declined for the property.
Of course.
They wrote a letter to their local MP, to Creasy at the time, being like, oh my God, this is so unfair. Look what our agents have done. Ms. Creasy thought it was a really good idea to send us a letter berating us for what we'd done, to which I asked her if she was instructing us to act fraudulently on behalf of tenants. And, you know, therein lies the conundrum. We couldn't disclose that. And in the end, they did end up being evicted by a court of bailiffs, but they did find something. And we did actually talk to the agent and go, look, this is the situation. And they could see past that, and they took a dice roll on it. But yes, you know, to your point, referencing is really important. Although, and this is a topic for another day, I had a fascinating chat after one of the Lettings Industry Council meetings earlier this year. I'm not going to disclose who it was, but it was a big referencing business within the lettings industry. And we were talking about rent arrears and stuff. And as you said, I was like, it's all about the referencing. Got to be comprehensive referencing. Yeah. And we here at Base also believe, and you can only do this in small businesses, corporates can never do this, but personal approval.
Yeah.
Like, we will vet tenants based on personality as well as what their references say. Like, if they are rude to you from the moment they inquire about a property, that ain't ever going to change. If they're rude to you when they need something from you or want something that you've got,
yeah,
that's not going to improve when they feel like you've let them down or dropped the ball on something.
A bad attitude is a bad attitude.
Exactly. But the interesting conversation I had was actually, referencing, but data. You know, it was like, the fact is, rent arrears sit at approximately X. I think it's about 3.5%. When you look at reference tenants who have passed referencing, I think it still sits at about 2.7%. So the difference between a reference and an unreferenced tenants in terms of risk is actually only about 0.8%. Yeah. Yes, compounded, it's like a third, but true market terms, and if we're moving into a marketplace where we're having more and more corporate landlords, more and more large-scale landlords, we're moving into... are you slowly dying over there?
Yeah, I'm all right.
We're moving into an industry marketplace which is consolidating, and I think we're going to continue to see that. I think actually you'll see more and more landlords and businesses go, do you know what? That's all built into our business model. We've factored in rent arrears of 3.5%. We've factored in dilapidations of X. We've factored in XYZ because that is how the market trades.
I agree, and I'm seeing more and more, I would say, professional landlords with the larger portfolios don't even take deposits anymore because that's a ball ache they don't need.
Yeah.
So they just don't bother with it, and they just suck up any damage or rent arrears.
And you factor it in, you charge, we've seen it with the build to rent. You charge a little bit more, you charge an extra 3% a month in rent, but you know that dilapidations cost you 2% a year. Yeah. So you've now just added a % margin to your business. And like you said, you've got rid of that hassle, that friction. I'm not for 1 second advocating everyone's get rid of deposits, because that might impact one of my businesses. But I think it's interesting that people look outside of it and look at overall behaviour and take an interesting approach. And I think that is one thing, the corporatisation of renting, if done right, as landlords, the corporatisation of landlording, I should say. I think the interesting thing with that is, I do think from a tenant perspective, service levels, in inverted commas, might not necessarily match where they are now. We know corporate businesses ultimately just in any industry can't deliver that level of service and detail that an independent does. But the fact that a cracked mirror or a little carpet burn or whatever it is doesn't become this horrendous, drawn out 3-month tirade over 400 quid at the end, and it's just like, don't worry, we've got offcuts.
Yeah.
You know, it's factored in. We know that the next tenant actually won't give a toss that there's an iron burn in the corner of the room. It's not ideal, but they'll still rent the property. They'll still pay the same rent. And in 3 years' time, we will get rid of that.
Yeah.
And I think in that respect, you know, tenants will move into a smoother, maybe simpler rental marketplace.
I think they'll lose that personal touch, though. Because obviously with the bigger corporates, you are just a number on a spreadsheet rather than maybe having that sort of picking up the phone and speaking to your personal property manager.
And look, I think that's true of everything, right? That's true of, you know, whether you're going to your little corner shop, whether you're going to, you know, your nice little fashion shop rather than top shop, or, you know, whatever it is, it's, you know, you'll still have people that will opt or lean towards that. You'll still want people who will want something a bit more refined, a bit more personal, a bit more upmarket. But I actually think, particularly for the lower level rental market, if the corporates come in at that end of the market more, and we'll see, that I think you'll see a seismic shift, because I think the market's attitude to low revenue rental properties compounds what we've already talked about. Attitudes towards tenants, attitudes of landlords towards those properties, et cetera, et cetera. And I think with this greater legislation, I think that's going to scare some of those more entry-level landlords out of the market, and either those will free those homes up for lower income people to buy, or those homes will come into a more corporate environment, and there, like I said, they will run those portfolios a very different way. They will have their annual budgeting and contractors and everything else mapped out, and as long as you haven't gone in there and put a sledgehammer through the wall and literally left a shell, you know.
No, I agree. And I think from, you know, bringing properties back into the market for first-time buyers, I don't know genuinely how realistic that is, because the lenders will have to change their criteria to be able to accommodate that.
Oh, look, surely. Affordability is still a big problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Affordability is still a big problem. You know, the mortgage market is still broken. I still am bemused that, you know, that, for instance, me, you know, a person who has rented in London for 27 years, you know, and for the last 10, 12 years at quite a lot of rent, you know, I should be able to really sit in front of any bank and go, there is nearly 12 years of me paying a substantial amount of money, month in, month out, on time, in fact, early every month. Give me a mortgage for the same amount.
Absolutely.
And it shouldn't be any other conversation about how much do you earn, how much do you do this. No, I'm showing you for 12 years, I have paid that every frigging month. And you have no other benchmark at all for me to prove that I can meet a substantial monthly debt for an extended period of time. I still am bemused that people like me cannot access finance through that process. You know, credit ladder and stuff, you know, that was a long time ago now.
Yeah.
And it hasn't really, sadly, shifted the needle.
It hasn't, but the problem with Credit Ladder as well, they weren't linked into all of the banks. They were only linked into certain banks. So I'm with Metro Bank, they weren't linked through to that. So sadly, none of my rent could be paid against my credit rating unless I changed banks, but that's a ball ache in itself. Although I did read in the press last week that Experian are now doing it as a free service. With Experian, you can pay for it. I think it's £2 a month at the moment to have your
I think I use Credit Ladder on mine. I know I paid for their like annual premium service where it gets shared with all the financial institutions, but I think that's like £60 a year. Now, does that? I don't know. Do I get £60 a year's worth of credit on my account? I don't know.
No, but I'm like you. The amount of rent that I pay, I could comfortably have a mortgage and a much bigger house. You know, if.
But it's this whole 10% plus your stamp duty thing.
Yeah.
How boring. Mm-hmm. And on that bombshell, we've pretty much come to the end of our chit chat. So, I mean, we have wafted and wandered.
Yes,
we've
we have.
covered a lot.
Yeah.
A little bit, but a lot. So look, if you are a letting agent out there and you are trying to wrap your head around the Renters' Rights Act and what that means to your business, this is the lady you want. Can do Zoom, but is very happy to live her forlorn partner home alone and travel the country, bouging it in spa hotels all the time, obviously. Premier Inn have got hot tubs, haven't they?
Not the ones I've stayed
in.
No.
But no, if you're trying to figure out from a kind of structure, implementation, compliance, that is absolutely where Julie's at a forte. Julie will happily sit down and talk to you about fee structures and revenue and how your business is going to work, but you need to be prepared. You need to have facts, data and information. You need to understand where your money comes from right now in terms of letting fees, management fees, renewal fees, top-ups from different services that you provide your landlords to, whether that's registering a deposit or doing a check-in or whatever it is. You need to understand that and how the Act is going to impact that and how you hope to replace that. You need to understand what your portfolio is. Yes, the kind of golden phrase being bandied around at the moment is, oh, it's fine, I'll just move all my landlords from let only to rent, collect and fully managed. Well, the 36% that use the industry to manage their properties hasn't really changed in the last 20 years, and we've had quite a lot of legislative change in that period of time. So what do you think is going to suddenly make your landlords upgrade a service? Or maybe you're looking to offer them an upgraded service for the same fee, but then how are you mitigating that? How are you managing that? How are you going to staff that, facilitate that? So yes, all things Renters' Rights Act and implementation, talk to Julie. And look, be keen to hear your guys' thoughts on some of the stuff we've talked about today. The servicing of rent arrears through grants and so on and so forth, with a view to helping a tenancy continue. Getting beyond that toxic friction point at the start of a rent arrears process and understanding that, typically 99.9% of the time, no one, not landlord, not tenant, not you, no one wants that situation. So let's find the best and easiest solution for everyone to get out of that. And I would argue that most landlords, they just want the problem resolved. If the tenant can get that rent arrears settled and get themselves back into a secure position of income, most landlords are going to be happy. What do you think the future of complaints looks like with AI-empowered tenants? It's something I think I want to talk about a bit more, but I think it's something that we all as agents and landlords need to really start thinking about. And I think that's something to be cautious about, but it's also something to think about as an opportunity. And again, for agents out there, stop being afraid of the Renters' Rights Act. It's as letting agents, it's great for you if you're a good agent, if you're good at understanding the law, at implementing compliance and regulation, at educating your landlords on everything you do for them. fundamentally, this just adds more strings to your bow. There's more you're going to be doing to be safeguarding your landlords, helping them navigate it, understand it, rather than freaking out and scaring them about the fact that this is going to ruin the PRS, and then being bemused that a third of your landlords either want to disinstruct you or sell. Your dialogue, your message that you put out there, you are the one driving how your clients perceive the market. So if you run around panicking that this is the end of the PRS, guess what? Your clients who've come to trust your advice and your insights are going to believe that it's the end of the PRS and are going to act accordingly. Whereas I think for the vast majority of us, we understand that there's a massive amount of change. It's going to be one of the biggest changes that our industry's ever seen, but I also still think fundamentally the PRS and how it works is fundamentally not going to change at all. Because most landlords want to provide a home to a tenant, and most tenants want to just pay their rent and have things fixed and be left the hell alone and live in a home. And agents like to facilitate that process. And regardless of all these changes, those key things aren't going to change. So let's start talking about things a bit more positively. Let's keep our landlords on board, engage experts where you need them, think of different ways you can solve problems within your business. And yeah, onwards, faster, better. But reach out to Julie. Julie, what is the website?
It is literally lettingsadviceservice.co.uk.
Boom. Could not be simpler. The Ron Seal approach to marketing, much like Depository, does what it says on the tin.
Absolutely.
Julie, darling, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming in today. Pretty sure I dominated talking too much in that one, but glad we got you down here. You've known me long enough. You knew that was coming anyway. Guys, more podcasts coming soon. Check in. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you like. Give us your thoughts and ideas. See you soon.